tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect. Do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. Tell you the
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 14th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets High School DxD. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Malfoy Manor, England. Do we have news of our spy in Japan, Rodolphus? Voldemort asked one of the two Lestrange brothers in a cold tone as his familiar Nagini was coiled around him with her head resting on his lap. No, my lord, so far nothing, the man in question responded to the Dark Lord with a hint of frustration and fear, as it was well known that Lord Voldemort never loved to be out of reports from his followers. And as you might have guessed, those words seemed to not have pleased Snakeface, because his cold face turned into a dark scowl, a sight that frightened a lot of his followers, as they all knew that when he was angry, a Crucio will not be far behind. And of course, they all were proved right as a few seconds later. Crucio. Rodolphus rolled on the ground, screaming in agony as some Death Eaters backed away from the man in fright. Why is he taking that long to contact us? Voldemort hissed menacingly as he stared down at Rodolphus with narrowed eyes, while Nagini hissed in anger. I swear, my lord, I don't know, the Death Eater replied to the angered Dark Lord as he slowly went back on his feet. Maybe he had been captured by the Potter BRT or a Japan or... Bellatrix Lestrange inquired with a sneer on her face. Voldemort turned his head to look at her and opened his mouth to say something, only for Narcissa Malfoy to burst into the room with a strange box in her hands. My lord. What do you want? Snakeface asked her with irritation at being interrupted, while Nagini hissed at the newcomer, ready to strike if her MSTR ordered her to. We just received this for you, my lord, it came from Japan. Lady Malfoy inquired to her lord as she bowed before him while putting the box down at his feet. At the sight of it, Nagina carefully approached it, using her forked tongue to detect anything that could be dangerous to her MSTR. Master. The large snake called out to the Dark Lord as she looked away from the box. What is this at Nagini? Voldemort asked his familiar while using Parseltongue. A part of the Dark Lord, no one could understand what the snake was saying, as all they heard were hisses. I smell BLD in there. Human BLD. Nagini replied to her MSTR while looking back at the box. Lucius. Voldemort called out once his mind processed this information. Yes, my lord. The blonde Malfoy patriarch asked his lord after stepping forward from the crowd of Death Eaters. Among the people gathered around the Dark Lord was none other than Severus Snape, who was watching everything with interest, even if he was trying to hide it behind a mask of indifference. Of course, he was a spy, so his main job was to hear everything that was going on at this assembly so he could report it to Albus Dumbledore. However, when there was a meeting with the whole Order of the Phoenix, he would do the same but report everything to Voldemort. Yes, he spied the two parties. Which was risky in my opinion. Anyway, he had been ordered by Albus to keep his ears sharp in case the missing Potter was mentioned, and so far, nothing as the spy Rodolphus sent to Japan had not made any reports of the boy. Sometimes, Severus wondered how the boy would be like. Would he be nothing more than a spoiled BRT like Jacob and James Potter? Or would he be more like Lily? But as the time passed, Severus thought that it wouldn't be the case, as the missing boy Harry hadn't lived with his family, so he might be completely different from them, which was true in fact, but he didn't know it yet. But deep down, because of his legendary hatred toward anything related to James Potter, he actually thought that regardless of where he lived, he would be nothing more than a troublemaker. Back to present, Voldemort looked at Lucius with his usual cold expression as he ordered him sternly, "Open this box." "Yes, my lord." Lord Malfoy responded to his lord before slowly opening the mysterious package. Some of the Death Eaters had stepped closer to get a better view of what might contain this mysterious box, while Narcissa looked at her husband with some worry as she was afraid that whatever was inside it would be surely dangerous. Suddenly, Lord Malfoy, just as he opened the box, backed away from it with a cry of surprise and disgust. Why? Because just as he opened the box, he was greeted by a good number of flies and a stench that caused more than one a sudden urge to vomit. Voldemort stepped closer to the box and lowered his head so it was above it while making sure to not be close enough as to no succumb to this stench as Nagini was hissing in disgust behind him. Inside the box was a hand that had been ripped off its owner without a doubt about it. It must have been a few days ago because the skin was really pale as clotted blood covered it along with a good number of flies and larvae. However, there was also a strange ring on the middle finger, a ring Rodolphus apparently recognized instantly because the moment he saw it, he couldn't himself from remarking it with a tone filled with shock and disbelief. "I know this ring, it belongs to the man I sent in Japan, my lord." Voldemort hummed with a frown when noticed something else in the box, a letter who radiated a strong power unlike anything he felt before. Slowly and filled with curiosity, he lowered his hand inside before picking up the piece of paper so he could read it. Shaking it get rid of the flies on it, the snake-faced man opened the letter before reading it with attention. To the Dark Lord Voldemort. My name is Harry Peverell Gryffindor Ravenclaw Slytherin Emrys Lefay, and if I'm sending you this letter, it is to tell you to stop sending more people in my home or else I will send them back to you in bite-sized pieces. Your man has been quite unpleasant as he couldn't stop calling me something I am not, aka Potter. I will make myself clear here, I am not and will never be a Potter. In fact, if you kill the entire Potter family, I will congratulate you for it. Also, if I were you, I would not listen to a prophecy as fake as the one made by Trelawney. If you want to know, only a prophecy made by the Pythia of Delphi are true. But I'm not you, so you can do whatever you want. However, I will tell you this now, if you want to destroy the entire wizarding world, then be my guest. I will not even lift a finger for them. Speaking of which, I should thank you for what you did many years ago, because if you hadn't I would be no better than those pathetic excuse of human beings. Anyway, you must be wondering why I am telling you this. Well, it's not because I don't want to fight you. Believe me, I would love, but you never hurted people I loved, so I have no quarrel with you, but it will change if you even scratch a member of my family, which would be impossible due to the fact I'm not in England. Don't go after my family and I won't oppose you in your quest for power. Like I said, I have nothing against you and it won't change unless you attack a person dear to me. Now that those points are made, I wish you good luck in taking over the wizarding world. Cordially, Lord Peverell Gryffindor Ravenclaw Slytherin Emrys Lefay. Once he finished reading the letter, Voldemort reared his head back as he let out a maniacal laugh that echoed throughout the room, scaring the Death Eaters gathered around him. My lord? May I ask what is so funny? Bellatrix Lestrange née Black inquired her lord with some confusion as she wondered what could cause such a reactions to someone as cold as her MSTR. My dear followers, we won't have to send people to Japan anymore. Voldemort inquired to the gathered Death Eaters while totally ignoring Bellatrix's question. This is a letter from Harry Peverell Gryffindor Ravenclaw Slytherin Emrys Lefay. He is stating that he does not want anything to do with the wizarding world. From what is written here, he would gladly congratulate me if I destroy everything here. Voldemort explained to his followers as he rose his hand in the air with the piece of paper in it. Murmurs of disbelief echoed in the room as the Death Eaters spoke to one another. How dare this disgusting half-breed declare himself as Lord Slytherin? Bellatrix roared in outrage as she was red in rage. Silence. The Dark Lord hissed sternly at his most loyal follower, who instantly bowed her head, mumbling an apologize. Look closely at the words, Bellatrix. They had been written in BLD. And don't you feel the power radiating from the letter itself? The boy is really powerful. And you do know what writing in his BLD mean? Voldemort asked the woman with a stern look on his face. Yes, MSTR, Bellatrix replied with a deep sigh. In the wizarding world, BLD was sacred and was used generally for transactions at Gringotts or to write something official. The boy used his BLD to write this letter, so it meant he wasn't lying about what he said in it. Voldemort also couldn't help but analyzing what the boy who lived wrote in his letter. He never knew that it was Trelawney who made the prophecy, and he knew her to be a fake. From what he heard, she had predicted the death of many students that never came. How could he have believed the words of a fake seer? In addition, the boy seemed to have absolutely no love for the Potters. If the lines, "I will make myself clear here, I am not and will never be a Potter. In fact, if you kill the entire Potter family, I will congratulate you for it," weren't proof enough. A part of this, Voldemort couldn't help but admire the power he felt from both the boy's BLD and the letter. He had never felt this before, and he was very curious about it. What this the magic of Japan? Maybe as no one in England possessed such power, even the meddling old coot Dumbledore. My lord? His thoughts were interrupted by Lucius Malfoy, who was looking at his MSTR with some concern as the Dark Lord hadn't said a word for a few minutes now. What will you do now, my lord? Rodolphius asked the Dark Lord with some curiosity mixed with a hint of glee. As I said, we won't have to deal with the boy. He made pretty good points in this letter, Severus. Yes, MSTR. The greasy-haired man asked softly as he bowed before his lord. Is this true? Is Trelawney the one who made the prophecy? Voldemort asked him with a soft tone filled with seriousness that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Yes, my lord, Severus replied after a few seconds of stunned silence. Crucio. The Dark Lord roared in anger as he shot the man the Cruciatus curse. Aerg. Severus screamed in agony as he rolled on the ground. For years, I believed in a prophecy that might as well as fake. Voldemort hissed in anger while behind him Nagini looked ready to lunge at the agonizing man for angering her MSTR. Around them, all the Death Eaters glared at Severus with anger, and some looked ready to kill him on the spot. Bellatrix, being Voldemort's most loyal follower and second in command, looked to be the most angered towards Severus. While she doesn't regret torturing the Longbottoms years ago, she would prefer to fight them on the battlefield. The Lestrange brothers didn't care, as in the end, the results would be the same. Lucius. Do you know who is the Pythia of Delphi? Voldemort asked Lord Malfoy coldly but also with some curiosity. Yes, my lord, the Pythia is an oracle and a priestess of the gold Apollo in Greek mythology. From what I heard, every prophecy she made ended up to realize one way or another, Lucius responded after a few seconds of thoughts. I see, Voldemort hummed deep in thought once Lord Malfoy stopped talking. This is nonsense. This Pythia might just be a true seer. Rabastin Lestrange sneered from his place beside his brother Rodolphius. Actually, from what I heard, she received her prophecies from Apollo himself. Those who tried to change their destinies always ended up fulfilling the prophecies. Nod inquired in a grumble-like tone from his place. Gods doesn't exist. There is nothing more powerful than our Lord. Bellatrix replied arrogantly with a dismissive hand as if it was nothing serious. Voldemort, however, hissed at her with a stern expression on his face. Silence. Bellatrix instantly closed her mouth to avoid her Lord more, and the rest of the Death Eaters did the same. Snakeface then closed his eyes as he went deep in thought. While he knew he was powerful, even he had to admit that there were more powerful people out there. The Japanese, for example, were skilled in both magic, particularly elemental, and combat, especially with swords. In addition, the yokai who lived there were powerful enough to wipe out the entire wizarding world if they wanted to. The high vampires were also extremely dangerous and powerful. Unlike those we see in the wizarding world, high vampires had superhuman physical abilities such as strength and endurance, and were able to breed and control bats and insects, turning into a flock of bats, using them for reconnaissance, and could even transform their body parts. Uniquely, vampires had immortal bodies and are able to change their appearance to their liking. The vampires in the wizarding world were a lot weaker than them, in fact, by the fact they didn't possess any of those abilities. Sure, both species are weak against sunlight and things related to what the Muggles called the Church, but they were also weaker against garlic. Speaking of which, he had heard that the high vampires had been more vocal on their refusal to join him once again, and they went as far as menacing the ones in the wizarding world, promising them for those who would join him in his crusade. The Dark Lord had since then wondered what happened to have the high vampires against him. They had been neutral during the last Wizarding War, as it was well known how much they despised everything that wasn't a high vampire. Voldemort would have loved to have them fighting with him because, with their help, the Wizarding World would be his, and hadn't enjoyed their refusal. However, he knew that declaring war to them would be a suicide worse than declaring war to Japan. Shaking his head to regain his composure, the Dark Lord released a deep sigh before looking back at his followers, who all waited for him to say something, which he did. From that day on, I can kill anything on my past without having a fake prophecy dictating my ways. Voldemort began to say in a loud voice so everyone could hear him. From that day on, I don't want to hear anything about the prophecy and the boy. I don't want to create problems with Japan, the Dark Lord added with narrowed eyes, which caused many of his followers to nod their heads quickly in response. My lord, should we really let the boy live? He might return and challenge you, my lord. Bellatrix inquired her MSTR with a frown of confusion and a bit of disappointment. Read this letter and you will understand, Voldemort replied back without answering her question directly. Blinking in surprise and confusion, Bellatrix slowly reached forward before reading the letter's content, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at each line she read. She mumbled stupidly as she didn't know what to say once she finished reading the letter in its totality. Voldemort, without saying anything, took back the letter before swiftly turning his head toward one man in particular. Severus. Come closer. The greasy-haired spy stepped closer before bowing in front of his MSTR. Yes, my lord. Read this, Voldemort ordered the man in an almost sweet evil tone. Frowning, the man did what he was told, and it was all thanks to his occlumency that he managed to keep his composure, as inside he was paling terribly. Just by the words, you could clearly see all the hatred the boy had for the Wizarding World and his own family, to the point of even being ready to congratulate the Dark Lord if he killed them all. Severus was speechless as his mind stopped working for a few seconds. Smirking at the lack of reaction, Voldemort used this moment to wave his wand above the letter, changing some details on it before yelling loudly. Lucius. Yes, my lord. Lord Malfoy inquired his MSTR after flinching when his name was called. Take this letter and publish this content into the Daily Prophet. I want the whole Wizarding World to know that the boy will never save them against us. Voldemort ordered the blonde man, with nothing but satisfaction clear on his noseless face. And don't tell them where the boy is, or else I will curse you. Yes, my lord. Lucius Malfoy replied with a bow as he picked the letter handed to him by Voldemort before dashing away as if he had the devil on his tail. My lord. May we know why you want to publish this letter on the Prophet? One of the Death Eater, a recently joined one, asked his MSTR from the back of the crowd. Isn't it obvious? The second they read what their savior wrote on this letter, it will create a wave of panic through our enemies' ranks. Voldemort replied with a mad grin as behind him Nagini hissed with satisfaction and a bit of excitement. Those words caused the Death Eaters to grin in equal madness as they thought of all the things they could now do without having to fear about someone defeating their MSTR. The oldest one still thought it was impossible. The Wizarding World will soon be ours. Voldemort inquired loudly to his troops, who cheered loudly for their future victory. One person wasn't cheering through. Who was it? Answer, Severus Snape. The greasy-haired man still couldn't believe what he just read on this letter, but he was also a bit excited as he imagined the reactions of many people in the Wizarding World at what their beloved savior thought of them all. One thing was sure, if Dumbledore saw it, the old coot might got a heart attack. While Severus was thinking, someone was watching his cheering followers with cold satisfaction. Someone who was absently petting the top of Nagini's head as she went to stand by his side like the loyal familiar she is. Voldemort was pleased by the current development. Now he won't have to think about the missing boy anymore. A letter written with the owner's BLD proved him that what the boy said was genuine and trustworthy. And beside, he was in Japan, and the last thing Voldemort wanted to have was a war with the Japaneses. Maybe I sold write a letter back to the boy, don't you think, my dear? The Dark Lord asked his familiar in a soft tone while using Parseltongue. Use-hold master, I tasted a powerful magic from the box, and the BLD a power greater than I have ever successed. Nagini hissed back at him while pressed her head further against his hand as he petted her. I sensed it too, his power is greater than mine, he would make a worthy opponent, maybe I will meet him one day, Voldemort hissed to himself while unconsciously still using Parseltongue. Very well, I will send him a message from now on, he won't be bothered by any of my Death Eaters, the Dark Lord thought to himself with a nod as he looked back at his followers who stopped cheering to murmur with one another with glee. Now, thanks to the boy's letter, he could do whatever he wanted without having to worry about a false prophecy. Severus. Go back to Dumbledore and tell him everything you saw here except for the letter. If you do, I will kill you. The snake-faced man hissed to the greasy-haired potion teacher at Hogwarts, who bowed his head at his lord before dashing away from the room through the shadows. I can imagine the look on Dumbledore's face once the Daily Prophet arrived tomorrow, Voldemort inquired out loud to himself before cackling like a maniacal man. But my lord, wouldn't Snape tell the old fool regardless? Rodolphus asked his MSTR with a frown. Don't be stupid. Severus wouldn't dare oppose me. Unless he wants to face the consequences. The Dark Lord hissed at the man who backed away with a mumble of apology. Now all we have to do is waiting and enjoy the panic ahead. Voldemort inquired loudly to his followers, who all cheered back excitedly. Soon, the wizarding world would be theirs. Elsewhere, Potter Manor. Severus, my boy. What news do you bring to this meeting? Albus Dumbledore greeted the greasy-haired man once the latter appeared at Potter Manor, where coincidentally another meeting of the Order was just about to finish. Around the old coot, everyone was looking at the newcomer expectantly, with among them Lily and James Potter, the parents of the supposed boy who lived, or in Severus' opinion the boy who don't care. Before the man's arrival, they were all talking about Voldemort's recent alliance with the Coven of Vampires in England and Greyback's attacks at Diagon Alley. James Potter, or Lord Potter, had once again asked if there were any clues about Harry's locations, and once again he received the same answer. Ever since the truth about Voldemort and Harry came out, James had been among those who wanted the missing boy to be found, but unlike the others it was for dark reasons. He wanted to reclaim the lordships Harry took years ago, Gryffindor, Emery's and Peveril, while giving his wife, Lily, her rightful title, Lady Ravenclaw. He also wanted to how it felt to be the boy who lives father again after months of being scorned and insulted. He wanted the attention and fame again. Lily, for her part, also wanted her eldest child back, but unlike her husband, it was to apologize to him for abandoning to Petunia and Vernon Desley's. She felt awful ever since she left him behind to take care of his brother Jacob, who until months ago had been seen as Voldemort's vanquishers and the boy who lived. Ever since the truth came out after the whole Department of Mysteries fiasco, the redhead had been looking for her eldest son to make amends. Back to present, Severus took his take as he stared at everyone's present. He wanted to tell them about the letter and that their savior wanted nothing to do with them, and in fact had even instilled Voldemort to kill everyone if he wanted to. After a few seconds of silence, the greasy-haired man thought it was better to lie, and later saying he had been imperioused by Voldemort as he opened his mouth to answer the old man. Theirs was nothing interesting. Albus the spy the Dark Lord sent hadn't reported anything. At those words, he could see some people of the Order deflating in disappointment, particularly Lily, who hoped that this time, she would get a cue of Harry's whereabout. A part of him wanted to tell her that Harry was in Japan but remained silent. She will learn it soon anyway, as the Dark Lord instructed Lucius to give the letter to the Daily Prophet so it could published. The Daily Prophet will be animated to say the least, and he would be lying to himself if he said he wasn't looking forward to it. Back to present, Albus's shoulders slumped a bit after those words reached his aged ears as he released a deep breath. Some spy you are, Snevellis. James sneered at the greasy-haired man, who scowled at him with a cold expression. I am more usually that the piece of trash you are, Potter. Severus snarled back with nothing but loathing in his tone. James growled in anger at being insulted, but the moment he was about to retort, his wife Lily slapped the back of his head with a glare that could scare even a Dementor. As the two enemies glared at each other, Albus was still deep in thought, ignoring them. It is unfortunate, the old man whispered to himself while internally fuming with frustration. Like the people present, Albus Percival Bruin Wulfric Dumbledore wanted Harry to be found, but like James, it was for dark reasons. The old coot wanted the boy to be found so he could be used as the perfect weapon against Voldemort. Well, in truth, he wanted the boy to die so he, the second coming of Merlin, could defeat the Dark Lord and gain more fame. He had known for years that Tom Marvolo Riddle had created Horcruxes, and he had thought that Jacob Potter was one as he was marked at the Dark Lord's equal. He had ignored the trace of dark magic on baby Harry as he abandoned the child to the Dursley years ago. He realized after the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries how much of a mistake he did that night, as apparently Jacob wasn't the chosen one but his brother, who he had declared a squib at the time. After the truth came out that he and the Potters had abandoned the true chosen one, the entirety of the wizarding world had been against them, wanting their heads. Jacob was now seen as nothing more than an impostor and a fake, which had turned the boy bitter and cold. At Hogwarts, the only ones who putted up with the former boy who lived were now Hermione Granger the bookworm and the brightest witch of her age, Ron Weasley his best friend and Ginny Weasley his girlfriend. They were the only ones who still supported him as everyone else turned their back on him, even the few who admired him. Even Dumbledore saw his reputation declining ever since he defeated his lover Gellert Grindelwald. The old man had been seen as the second most powerful wizard of all time after the great Merlin, and many people supporting him. But ever since that fateful day at the Department of Mysteries, a good portion of them lost faith in him for what he did to the true savior. The old fool wanted to rectify this by finding the missing BRT, obliviate him of all the things he might have learned of his time out of his native country, and mold him into how he should be in the first place, a malleable boy who would do anything he would told him to. In short, a perfect puppet. Another reason he wanted the blasted boy found was to take back what he thought was his, the Deathly Hallows. Albus Dumbledore always knew that the Hallows were real and wanted to have the 3 artifacts so he could be immortal and have his legend becoming even bigger by being the first immortal wizard. Sadly for him, the Hallows had been taken by the missing BRT the moment he disowned himself from the Potter family and took for himself the lordships of houses his parents have forgotten to claim. The Hallows were attached to House Peverell, and when the boy claimed it, they returned to their rightful owner. Albus knew this but refused to let someone a part of him, the great Albus Dumbledore, the second coming of Merlin, being the MSTR of death. A part of this, Albus had been more than shocked when he discovered that the missing BRT was now lord of powerful houses and the only living heirs of Hogwarts, thanks to him being Lord Gryffindor, Ravenclaw and Slytherin. Even worse, Harry was now the lord of the houses of Merlin Emrys and Morgana Le Fay. 2 powerful sorcerers who lived at the same time that the legendary King Arthur. Albus had always knew that Lily wasn't a Muggleborn, as he was the one who took her away from her family before leaving her to the Evans, where she was adopted. He had even made sure that Lily's BLD family were no more so she wouldn't discover her true heritage. But it was all in vain thanks to the BRT. Lily had confronted him about this, and despite her well-known fiery temper, he managed to hide her origins, but he had received a good injury from Lady Potter during the discussion. He had never forgiven Lily for attacking him, at least internally, because in the outside, he treated like usual. Anyway, back to topic, the old coot took a deep breath before looking back at his spy. "Is there really nothing you can tell us, my boy?" Severus, who was glaring daggers at his nemesis, turned his head to look back at Albus with a straight expression on his face. Apparently, the vampires of England had refused to ally with the Dark Lord. Really? But why? Aren't they supposed to be allied with him? Arthur Weasley asked the spy with a frown of confusion. No, all vampires had allied themselves with you-know-who in the last war, but still, I don't understand why they aren't doing it again now, Minerva replied in a soft tone while being deep in thought. From what I heard, the Covens of England received death threats if they dared to ally with the Dark Lord, Severus replied to Arthur's questions after nodding in agreement to Minerva's words. Death threats from who? Mundungus asked the spy gruffly. Ever since Alastair Moody left the Order, he had become the grumpy one, even if it wasn't a big change. The high-class vampires, Severus's answer caused some members of the Order to murmur with one another in shock and/or confusion. Albus, however, was shocked by the information. Of course, he knew about those type of vampires who were more powerful than the rest of their kinds, and he knew them to be arrogant as they saw all the other species as inferiors to them. They hadn't did anything in the First Wizarding War, and to hear they now menaced their own kind to not join the Dark Lord's forces. What is this nonsense? There is no such things as high-class vampires. They are all blood-sucker and fiends. Molly Weasley screeched loudly, which caused some people to wince in pain for their audition. Albus, can you tell us what is a high-class vampire? What different them from those we know? Arthur quickly asked the head of the order to prevent Molly to say something else. Which failed, as instantly she turned her head to stare at him with disbelief as she shrilled at him, "Arthur! Aren't you seriously listening to this nonsense?" "Calm down, Molly. As for high-class vampires being nonsense, this is false." The old wizard replied to the Weasley matriarch, as himself hated it when she screamed like a banshee. High-class vampires or high vampires are more powerful and dangerous than the ones we know here in England. Their physical abilities are extraordinary, and unlike any vampires they can breed, Albus began to say to the rest of the order, who upon hearing this started to stare at him with shock and a bit of fright. Severus was the only one who looked astonished, as he already knew about this thanks to Voldemort and some of this Death Eaters. Lily, however, had never heard of high vampires before, so she was really curious about them as she listened to Albus with nothing attention and interest. They are also able to control bats, using them for reconnaissance, and could even transform their body parts. Even worse, they have the ability to transform into a flock of bats. Finally, high vampires had immortal bodies and can change their appearance to their liking. When the old wizard stopped talking, the assistants were all in shock, and Molly even harbored a pale face as she seemed horrified by this type of vampires. Arthur seemed just as distraught, but we could see the interest shining in his eyes. Minerva, however, was frowning as if she wondering how come she never heard about them before if they were that powerful. In fact, she wasn't the only one to think that, as everyone thought the same with only one voicing his mind. But Albus, why have we never heard about them until now? James asked the old wizard with disbelief and shock, as himself never heard of those type of vampires before. Because they don't usually interact with any other creature's sentience, or no, they think they are the top creatures and see the others as lower than them, Albus began to say, which caused Mundungus to grunt half loudly half softly. Like some purebloods we know, in short. Snickers could be heard from some of the order members, and Albus shook his head with amusement before resuming. As I said, they see every other creatures as below them, that why they hadn't allied with Voldemort during the last war. The others swallowed those informations in silence as their minds processed what they just heard. If they hadn't made a move years ago, why are they doing it now? Arthur asked Albus after a few moments of silence. They still don't want to ally themselves with the Dark Lord, they only menaced the covens of England to not join him, Severus replied with a shrug, even if he was a bit annoyed to have to repeat this part. But still, why they did? Minerva asked him with a frown, as she wondered what could have motivated the high vampires to do such a thing. I don't know, even the Dark Lord doesn't know, and the last thing he wants is to be in conflict with them, Severus replied to the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts. Albus nodded his head in understanding. High vampires were a lot more powerful than the vampires they all knew, and it would be foolish to affront an army of them. But Albus also knew something that his allies does not. The high vampires were separate in two factions, the Teeps faction and the Carmilla faction. Those factions were in a PRD of Cold War with one another because of something even him didn't know. The old coot then shot his eyes toward the pendulum standing not too far away and realized that it was time for this meeting to stop. If we have no more things to say, then I declare this meeting adjourned. Dumbledore inquired to the Order of the Phoenix as he went back on his feet. At those words, the people slowly left the room, leaving behind only a handful of persons, James, Lily, Albus, and Severus. Severus, my boy, I know I will keep my ears sharp in case the BRT is found. The greasy-haired man retorted before the old man had a chance to say more. Nodding his aged head, Albus watched as his spy left the room through the shadows, leaving now only him and the Potter patriarchs. Good night, Lily. James, he said to the two as he looked ready to leave. The two nodded at him and watched as the old cooperate out of their domain, leaving them sad about Harry's lack of clues. Time skip. The next day, however, the wizarding world was in a large state of panic and turmoil. Why? Because of the Daily Prophet and its head article. The boy who lived is the boy who don't see. By Rita Skeeter. That's right, dear readers, you read the headline correctly. Our recently discovered boy who lived and missing son of Lord and Lady Potter, Harry, abandons us to you-know-who. Tomorrow night, just before the closure of our office, we received a letter from our chosen one destined to you-know-who. After reading say letter, I was filled with horror and shock. I'll let you read it and see for yourself. Letter for HEWHO must not be named. By Harry. To the Dark Lord Voldemort. My name is Harry Peveril, and if I'm sending you this letter, it is to tell you to stop sending more people in my home, or else I will send them back to you in bite-sized pieces. Your man has been quite unpleasant, as he couldn't stop calling me something I am not, aka Potter. I will make myself clear here, I am not and will never be a Potter. In fact, if you kill the entire Potter family, I will congratulate you for it. Also, if I were you, I would not listen to a prophecy as fake as the one made by Trelawney. If you want to know, only a prophecy made by the Pythia of Delphi are true. But I'm not you, so you can do whatever you want. However, I will tell you this now, if you want to destroy the entire wizarding world, then be my guest. I will not even lift a finger for them. Speaking of which, I should thank you for what you did many years ago, because if you hadn't I would be no better than those pathetic excuse of human beings. Anyway, you must be wondering why I am telling you this. Well, it's not because I don't want to fight you, believe me I would love, but you never hurted people I loved, so I have no quarrel with you, but it will change if you even scratch a member of my family, which would be impossible due to the fact I'm not in England. Don't go after my family, and I won't oppose you in your quest for power. Like I said, I have nothing against you, and it won't change unless you attack a person dear to me. Now that those points are made, I wish you good luck in taking over the wizarding world. Cordially. Harry Peveril, the boy who hate the wizarding world. Disclaimer: the unspeakable working at the Daily Prophet swore of his life and magic that the BLD used to write the letter belonged to our chosen one. The opinions expressed in this letter published the Daily Prophet are Harry's own and do not reflect the view of those of the Daily Prophet. As you can see, dear readers, our chosen one doesn't care about us and seems to hate the Potters with passion. Something I can understand, as they abandoned him years ago. Thanks to the Potters and the estimated Albus Dumbledore, we lost the unique chance we had against you-know-who. But another question caught the Daily Prophet's interest: how did Harry become Lord Peveril? House Peveril, whose first member is none other than one of the three brothers, Ignotus Peveril, and whose line is extinct. We at the Daily Prophet will try to find an answer to this question while asking you to make sure the ones who hurt our chosen one pay for their crimes. More information on House Peveril in page 4. Information on Harry's abandons in page 2. Those who read it except Voldemort and his Death Eaters were filled with anger, shock and terror, because the only one who can save them against the Dark Lord doesn't even want to do anything with England. Many started to send howlers to the Potters and Albus, but because of the wards, they couldn't come any closer. Of course, upon reading their edition of the Daily Prophet, Lily and James' faces turned as pale as if they had seen a ghost for the first time. While Lily was filled with shame and regret, James was also angry at his eldest for abandoning his BRTH country, but also for the mere thought of congratulating the Dark Lord if he killed them all. At the same time, in his office at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore was just as horrified by this as he read the article, but he was also angry. How dare the BRT abandon his destiny? How dare he allow Tom to slaughter them all? The old man wanted nothing more than to have the boy between his hands so he could strangle him. However, he was happy about one thing: Harry hadn't revealed his entire title to the Prophet, because if he had done so, it would create a bigger wave of panic through the wizarding world than what they are facing right now. After all, Harry was the heir of the founders, Merlin and Morgana Le Fay. Now he had an ever bigger reason to find the BRT, to make him accomplish the prophecy. Albus still thought it was a true one, and while Harry made a good point that the Pythia's prophecies had always proven true, he knew that this one was as well. The old man, at this instant, wondered if Severus knew about this, but brushed it aside. Severus would never dare hide such a big information from him. The man was his spy and his puppet for years now. He would never betray him. But just in case, he will ask the potion MSTR later. But first. Without saying anything, the old man approached his office's fireplace before tossing a handful of flu powder into it while saying loudly, "Potter Manor." After those words left his aged mouth, Albus found himself surrounded by a strange emerald green fire before disappearing in a crack of fire. Now alone in the office, Fawkes stared at the spot his MSTR left with deep sorrow as once again he wondered why he had bonded with Dumbledore in the first place. Albus had been a true light follower years ago, but thanks to power and fame, he turned more into the darkness of arrogance and haughtiness. The strong bond he and Fawkes shared a long time ago was becoming thinner and thinner as the time passed, and soon it would be really easy for the Phoenix to break it. Ever since that fateful night years ago, Fawkes grew to despite what his MSTR became, and ever since, looked forward for the day to finally be free of such a man. A shiver of excitement once again passed through his feathery body at the mere idea of leaving the old coot behind once and for all. Meanwhile, James and Lily got a visit in the form of Albus Dumbledore, who entered their manor through their own fireplace without announcing his arrival like he usually did. "Albus. Thanks Merlin, you are here. Have you seen the Daily Prophet?" Lord Potter asked the newcomer with anger and shock. "Hello James, hello Lily, yes I did, unfortunately," the old coot replied to James with a face filled with disappointment and hidden frustration. "We must do something, Albus." We won't be able to deal with more howlers." James inquired to the old wizard as behind the two Potters we could see a rather impressive pile of ashes on the grounds. They must have heard quite a good numbers of howlers to get such a result. Shaking his aged head to go back on topic, Albus took a deep breath before looking back at the two and saying firmly, without any trace of his usual grandfatherly expression, "We have no choice but to organize a new meeting with the rest of the order." James nodded without hesitation as he stared at the older wizard, while Lily sighed with a hint of annoyance because she knew that thanks to this letter, some would want Harry to be found again to make him fight the Dark Lord. While she was horrified and shocked by her eldest son's actions, the redhead had to admit that he had no reasons to help. After all, what did the wizarding world ever did for him? Nothing except abandoning him to abusive relatives, nothing except ignoring him in his time of needs. That's all they deserved for what they did to him. Lily had accepted this fatality ever since the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries. After all, she would have done the same if he was in Harry's place. Sighing deeply, Lady Potter watched with a frown as Albus and James sent their respective Patronus, a stag for James and a phoenix for Dumbledore, to warn the rest of the order of another upcoming meeting at Potter Manor. However, what they didn't know was that another group of people were talking about the Daily Prophet. Who was it? 4 people, with 3 of them being 18 years old and the last 17. The formerly known as the Golden Trio: Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger and Jacob Potter and Ginny Weasley. Jacob had decided to stay at the Burrow with Ron's family, where they received a copy of the Daily Prophet. I will pass Molly's shrill of horror and shock the moment she read the headline, or Arthur's pale face. Currently, the 4 of them were in Ron's bedroom speaking of the Daily Prophet and of a boy who don't care about England. I knew it. Your brother is not a savior. He is a coward. Ron snarled in disgust as he literally threw the paper at his best friend, who caught it with his left hand. He is no brother of mine. But he had a valid point about something, Jacob reluctantly admitted with a groan. And what that? Hermione asked him with a frown of confusion. Professor Trelawney being a fake, was Jacob's answer. They all stayed silent at this, as in fact, Trelawney, ever since they had her as a teacher, couldn't stop predicting someone's death. Mainly Jacob's before the whole fiasco took place. Even Jacob had to admit it had been refreshing to not be the target in divination class anymore. Ron, who didn't like divination in the first place, had to agree it would be better if Trelawney could stop with her "you will die" visions. While this is true, how dare he even think of congratulating you-know-who if he killed us all? Does he really? Is that angry with the wizarding world? Hermione hissed in anger and disgust as she went back on topic. Nah, he just want more attention. Ginny sneered in disgust as she thought of her boyfriend's brother who just proved her that he was not a hero like Jacob was. If he was really the boy who lived, he would have realized his duty and fought he who must know be named. Ron sneered as he glared at the window with anger and frustration. And yet he chose to let Voldemort slaughter us all. Jacob hissed back in agreement with his friend's words as he was disgusted with his older brother. Despite knowing what his family and Dumbledore did to Harry, Jacob thought that the now Lord Peverell deserved no sympathy as he stole what he thought was his by right, the title of boy who lived along with many other things that belonged to his family. Ever since the aftermatch of the Department of Mysteries, the public saw him as a fake and imposter, and all the fame he got for years was gone in a few hours. Jacob had always loved the attention he received from the entire wizarding world, and the advantages he got from it had helped him quite a lot in the past. And then everything went down ever since that god-forsaken day at the Ministry. Ever since that day, he was now among the most hated people in the wizarding world with his parents and Albus Dumbledore. "What do you think Professor Dumbledore will do?" Hermione asked her friends with a hint of worry in her tone. "I think the answer is easy to guess," Ginny began to say with a sniff of disdain. "He will double the searches to find Harry," Jacob continued with a snort of sarcasm. Ever since his brother had been hailed as the boy who lived, Albus Dumbledore, someone he saw as his grandfather, completely ignored him in favor of looking for Harry. It had truly broke his heart to see someone he respected so much turning his back on him for someone who didn't deserve it in his opinion. Ron looked at his friend with a hint sympathy, as it was not a secret that Jacob had always loved Dumbledore, and to be ignored by the man was hurting him greatly. Slowly, the orange-haired guy putted a hand on his friend's shoulder before squeezing it a bit in comfort. Jacob shot him a grateful look before looking back at the Daily Prophet's head article. "One day, I will find Harry and make him pay for what he did." The former boy who lived hissed in anger and internally glee at the thought of killing the one who stole him what was his by right. Ginny looked at her boyfriend with a dark grin, as for her, no one deserved the title of boy who lived or savior than Jacob Potter. For her, the true faker was Harry, the one who cast himself from the most ancient and most noble house of Potter, just because he hated his family. The faker even went as far as stealing lordships who belonged to the Potters. That's all he was in the mind of Ginny Ginevra Weasley, a faker, a coward, and a thief. "And I will be with you when that day come." The youngest Weasley promised to her boyfriend before kissing him on the cheek to show how much she loved him. "Count me in too, mate. Together we will teach this bstrd of a coward a lesson he will never forget." Ron declared boldly as he cracked his knuckles to show that he really wanted a fight. Hermione, however, looked a bit unsure. While the bushy-haired young woman was disgusted by Harry's refusal to help the wizarding world, she couldn't help but being a bit in agreement with him. When she heard what the Potters and Professor Dumbledore did, she had been outraged and disgusted, but still stay with one of the two only friends she ever had by loyalty. Hermione had noticed how Jacob seemed obsessed with killing his brother, and she was greatly worried for him as he was going into the dark path like Voldemort and the Death Eaters did before him. That's another reason of why she stayed with him, to prevent him from doing something stupid and reckless. Which hadn't a lot in the past if she was honest with herself, but she would still stay by his side no matter what. After all, that's what true friends do. Even if she liked it or not, Hermione will still support Jacob, but promised herself to not let him become like Lord Voldemort, a cold-blooded killer. The bushy-haired girl had to make sure that Jacob doesn't kill his brother, and to make him do something that would cause a lot of tremor from the entire wizarding world. Sighing deeply, Hermione looked back at her friends before doing her best serious poker face. "I'm in as well. You need someone to make sure you stay out of trouble." Jacob shot an amused glance as he chuckled slightly under his breath. "I knew I could count on you, Mione," he told her with some affection before turning his head to kiss Ginny's lips passionately. Can't you get a room, you two?" Ron remarked with some exasperation as he turned his red face away from them alongside Hermione, who rolled her eyes with amusement. "We are in a room," Jacob and Ginny both said at the same time as they grinned toothily at the orange-haired young man who blinked for a few seconds before sulking. "You are." Hermione giggled a bit at Ron's facial expression, which caused him to shot her a glare only to grumble in annoyance when the other two joined in the giggles. Glaring at them all, the youngest male Weasley quickly joined in as well as they all laughed in chorus. They were now acting like their ages again with the Daily Prophet's article completely forgotten at least for now. Elsewhere. Meanwhile, at Grimmauld Place, another discussion was taking place. Remus Lupin, Sirius Orion Black and Nymphadora Tonks were in the living room laughing as they read the last edition of the Daily Prophet. I have to call Harry and congratulate him for making me laugh so much, Sirius declared as he looked at his longtime friend as the two had been laughing for 20 minutes now. You didn't give him the mirror during our travel in Japan, remember, Padfoot? Remus reminded him with a smirk which caused the other mature man to sulk in both shame and sheepishness. And don't forget that you forgot to tell him the address of this place, Nymphadora. Don't call me that, Tonks retorted sweetly to Remus, who grumbled in annoyance under his bread as he hid his face with his hands. That was one of the many things he recently declared girlfriend hadn't forgotten and reminded him. Thank you for supporting me, Nymph, Sirius Black said to the pink-haired girl, only to yelp in fright and surprise as he dodged a stinging hex from an angered Tonks. Don't call me that. Remus grinned at his old friend while giving him a look that clearly said, you deserve that, you know. Sirius, noticing this, pouted like a child as he crossed his arms over his chest with a groan. Tonks stared at Lord Black with a satisfied grin on her face, even if she was a bit annoyed at having missed her shot. She cursed her mother for giving her such a name. But each time, she tried to tell her how much of a burden her name was, Andromeda Tonks would deny it by stating, I don't understand what is wrong with your name. It is appealing. To which the pink-haired young woman would answer with an annoyed tone. Because you aren't the one to bear it. The arguments would only end up with Andromeda shaking her head in disappointment as she loved the name she gave to her daughter. Her husband, Ted Tonks, decided to nickname their daughter Dora to avoid being hexed. Speaking of her parents, they both left the country after the attack of Fenrir Greyback in Diagon Alley some days ago. They left to head to the USA, United States of America, in case you didn't know, where they were sure they would be safe from Voldemort and his cronies. Back to present, Nymphadora Tonks then cleared her throat to catch the attention of the other two before asking nervously. Now what should we do? Maybe we should leave. I have a feeling Dumbledore will try to fetch us in a coming future, Remus began to say, only to be interrupted by his longtime friend, who frowned at him with confusion as he said those words. Why would he do that? Because we are the only ones who know Harry's location. Remus replied to him with a somber tone. But Albus doesn't know that. Sirius protested loudly from his seat as he stared at his friend with an unsure look. It doesn't matter. Minerva must have told him about our little trip to Japan, and I'm pretty sure he didn't believe her if she told him that we didn't find Harry. Remus explained in a hesitant tone which caused Sirius to open his eyes wide in realization. But why didn't he came then? Nymphadora, don't call me that, Tonks asked her boyfriend, with a frown, even if deep down she was a bit worried. I don't know, maybe he did believe Minerva, I really don't know, the werewolf replied in a soft tone filled with incertitude. Once those words were said, a long silence reigned between the three, and we could hear a fly flying in the room. Regardless, I think we should leave. Thanks to the Daily Prophet, Albus had now a new reason to look for Harry, Sirius inquired somberly to break the silence. Now he must be sure that Harry might be in Japan. Think about it, precisely when a Death Eater is sent to the east that the Daily Prophet received a letter of Harry. Nymphadora remarked in the same expression as she looked at the two men. The two marauders nodded their heads in agreement as they grimly looked at the pink-haired young woman. Do you really think Albus will be stupid enough to send more people in Japan? Especially after what happened last time? Remus asked her with a hint of worry in his tone. I don't think he will. The Ministry of Magic ordered the Aurors to keep an eye on any Orders members in case they illegally leave the country, Tonks replied while shaking her head slightly. Ever since Albus sent some people in Japan to find Harry, the Ministry of Magic, recently led by Amelia Bones, since Fudge had been kicked out by a vote of no confidence, had ordered all the Aurors to keep an eye on any members of the Order of the Phoenix and to arrest them if they tried anything to create a war between magical England and the Japanese government. After all, Japan had made itself clear that they didn't wanted any English people from the wizarding world on their grounds ever since Dolores Umbridge insulted them about how backwards they were compared to England. It was thanks to that dreadful woman that no more English people could go to Japan except for Rias, Rias, and Tonks, as the former was friends with some Japanese politicians. It was thanks to the fact he hated Umbridge and wasn't well liked by Fudge that the Japanese allowed Lord Black to enter their grounds as long as he doesn't cause any troubles, that's it. Mooney, you saw how much Dumbledore believed in this prophecy with Harry refusing to help the wizarding world. He might want to find him to force him to fight Moldy Short. Sirius inquired to his friend with a serious expression on his face. He wouldn't do that, right? I mean, forcing someone to, Tonks began to ask before being interrupted by her boyfriend, who replied somberly with narrowed eyes. Desperate times call for desperate measures. A huge silence followed this statement as the trio looked back and forth between one another. All right then. Creature. Sirius called out loudly with authority. Nasty BLD Trader MSTR calls for creature. A male house elf appeared with pop-like sound from who nowhere. Unlike Fanny and Mickey, this house elf had a bulbous, snout-like nose, bloodshot eyes, many folds of skin, and white hair growing out of his bat-like ears. He wasn't a pretty sight to look at, especially with that sneer on his face as he addressed his MSTR. Sirius narrowed his eyes at the house elf before snarling, "Shut up, creature, and go prepare our package. We are leaving." At the last words, Creature's face looked happier, and it was a wonder of why he wasn't literally leaping in joy. Nasty BLD Trader MSTR is leaving? I will make sure Nasty MSTR's stuffs are prepared. Creature said with excitement before disappearing after a snap of his fingers. Grumbling something under his beard, Sirius turned his head to look at Remus when the werewolf asked him with a raised brow. I still wonder why you keep him around. It is clear that he loathes you, Padfoot. I know, right? I can always kill him later, but we have better things to do, Lord Black replied to his longtime friend, who nodded in agreement, as the most important thing to do right now is leaving England before Dumbledore prevents it. Time skip. It was the end of the evening and a new reunion of the Order of the Phoenix was taking place. It was unusual for such a thing to happen, aka having two meetings in the same week, but it was necessary as they were discussing a familiar subject, Harry Peverell. The moment they all sat around the meeting table, profanities, insults, cries of disbelief and anger echoed in the air, and we could even hear it from outside the domain, but thanks to the wards, it was as if there was nothing at all. Order! Order! Dumbledore inquired loudly to the screaming members, who were too busy speaking with one another that they ignored him completely. Only a few people were silent: James Potter, Lily Potter, Minerva McGonagall, Mundungus, Severus Snape, and Albus himself. Seeing that it was futile to scream, the old wizard took a deep breath before pointing his wand, one he had brought after the elder wand disappeared thanks to the BRT who lived to annoy him, to his throat to cast a simple sonorous spell. Some of you may wonder what was the sonorous spell. Easy, the sonorous charm was usually used to amplify the targeted sound, be it someone's voice or an equipment. Silence. Albus's loud roared out in command as he looked at each people gathered around him. Instantly, the noises stopped as they all looked at the old man with terrifying eyes. Even those who were calm a few seconds ago were staring at Dumbledore with wide eyes of shock and fright. Casting a quiet charm on his throat, the old wizard then looked at everyone present one last time before opening his aged mouth to say those words. My friends, if we are gathered here once again, it is to discuss what you had all read in the Daily Prophet. Just as the last words escaped his mouth, hisses of anger, disgust and fear echoed throughout the people gathered around him. Many of them did read the Daily Prophet, and a lot of them had been shocked by what the boy who lived wrote to the Dark Lord. None of them could believe that the Chosen One had so much hatred toward the wizarding world to the point of congratulating Voldemort if he killed them all. While they all knew how much the boy must hate his family, no one had thought that he would be so willing to leave them to their fate. Some of them, well, more like most of them, even saw him as nothing more than a coward who was just scared to fight for the wizarding world, his own nation. Minerva, while almost having a heart attack after she read the prophet this morning, had to admit that she couldn't blame the boy, as they had done nothing to him in the past. Without even knowing it, the aged witch had the same opinion that Lily in the matter. Silence. I understand your frustration, but we cannot let it control us. Albus grandfatherly admonished the people present, who all grumbled their agreements and their apologizes. Why would Harry do that? Leaving us alone like this? Molly Weasley asked the old wizard in astonishment. Albus opened his mouth to answer, but someone beat him to it in the form of Lady Potter, whose voice was filled with regret and sorrow as she said those words. And why should he help us? We never did anything for him except abandoning him to abusive relatives or ignoring him in his time of need. She took a small pause as to gather her composition, as during her little talk, small tears were seen flowing down her cheeks. Why? Because, as she said those words, memories of a smiling baby Harry entered her mind, along with all the happy memories she had with her eldest before she left him in the care of her beloved sister. While I would have preferred to have him back among us, I have to admit this is all we deserve, Lily finished with a glare that sent chills down everyone's spines. Even Dumbledore had shivers running down his back. A perfect silence followed those words as some of the members looked down with a bit of shame. Arthur Weasley, the head of the Weasley family, was among them, unlike his wife Molly, who looked at Lily with a glare. But then the silence was broken by Lord Potter, who looked at his wife with disbelief and a bit of anger and disappointment. Lily, are you hearing what you're saying? All we have to do is finding Harry, apologize, and then everything will be back to normal. Of course, some people stared at the head of Potter family with disbelief or blankly. Many were thinking of how idiotic his plan sounded. Minerva even slapped her head with a hand, muttering about being surrounded by stupid people. Even Severus stared at his nemesis with a deadpan expression on his usual sneering face. Many with good senses could see how much this plan was stupid, but then again, English wizards, a part of a few, weren't seen as the brightest in the wizarding world. Once again, Potter is showing us how stupid and arrogant he is. The greasy-haired spy sneered at his nemesis, who looked away from his wife to glare up at him with great hatred. Shut up, Snivellis. No one called for you, Death Eater. James snarled back at the spy, who growled furiously as being called by the nickname he hated with passion. James! Albus roared out as he glared at Lord Potter, who cowed at the sudden intervention. I trust Severus in my life, and he is no more of a Death Eater than I am. The old man added sternly with a tone that invited no argument. Some people couldn't help but muttering about how true it was. While Albus Dumbledore was still seen as the second coming of Merlin, his reputation had changed drastically. He was no more seen as a follower of the light despite all his claims. Why? Because of the fact he was the one who told the Potters to abandon the Chosen One and leaving him with magic haters, muggles. Even Minerva stared at the old wizard with a frown. Never before the great Albus Dumbledore would say such things, even during the numerous time he had to save Severus either from the Authority or from the rest of the Order of the Phoenix. Herself had been angry at the man for abandoning a baby to people who hated magic, despised knowing it. Back to present, Albus, from the corner of his eyes, noticed with a grim expression that many people present were whispering about him things he hated to hear. He could hear some muttering about him being no better than some Death Eaters. Albus, internally, was furious. How dare they think of him this way? He was Albus Percival Brian Wulfric Dumbledore, the strongest wizard after Merlin, the chief warlock of the Wizengamot and supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards. He was the leader of the light, and all he was doing was for the greater good. Why can't they see it? However, he quickly calmed down as he remembered that English wizards were just sheep, barely smarter than 10 years children. It was one of the main reasons why Dumbledore saw himself as the only one capable of leading the wizarding world back to greatness, because he was wiser and smarter than them in his opinion. Clearing his throat to gain everyone's attention, he used his usual grandfatherly facade to speak to his follower. As I said earlier, we all read something really terrible at the Daily Prophet this morning. Harry Potter, or Harry Peverell as he is called now, had sent a disturbing letter to Voldemort, Albus began to say in a neutral expression while internally he was fuming by the BRT's behavior. Lily and James both stay silent at those words as the both of them remembered the letter clearly, especially the part where Harry mentioned that he would congratulate the Dark Lord if the letter killed them. Lily still had a hard time processing this part while James looked ready to find Harry, teach him some manners before doing what he planned to do which his wife didn't know about. Because James knew that if Lily got a single clue of what he planned to do with Harry once the boy was found, of course things would not be good for him. Harry believes that the prophecy is fake, and I tell you here now that it is not the case. Harry is destined to fight Voldemort. Either he likes it or not, it is his destiny. Albus resumed with a stern expression on his face while emphasizing some of the words. But what can we do? We looked everywhere for the boy and so far, he was never found. Mundungus replied grumpily from his seat as he sent a sideway glare at Dumbledore. That's where you are wrong. Think about it. The moment Voldemort, he once again ignored the flinches from the crowd as he said the Dark Lord's name, sent a spy in Japan. A few days later, Harry sent a letter. It is not a coincidence. Are you saying that Harry is in Japan? Arthur asked Albus with hope in his tone. I'm sure he is there, Arthur. All we have to do is going there and retrieve the bow. Dumbledore began to say to the head of the Weasley clan when a certain redhead with green eyes decided to speak. Albus, are you mad? Did you forget that the Ministry is keeping a close eye on us? Or Japan's warnings in case we intrude their grounds? Lily hissed angrily in shock at the old man, not caring who she was speaking to. At those words, Dumbledore's mind went back to that day when Dolores Umbridge thought it was a good idea to insult some Japan politicians who came to make a treaty with magical England. In the end, the treaty was signed and Japan forbidden any English wizards and witches to enter their lands. Except for Sirius Black, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, that's it. He internally huffed in frustration as he hadn't forget the menaces they received from Japanese law forces when the men he sent to find Harry had been caught thanks to the help of a Death Eater. While he knew he was powerful, Albus knew that the wizarding world, especially those of England, stood no chance against Magic Japan as they were more willing to kill their opponents. No, I didn't, Lily, but we have no choice. It is for the greater good, Albus replied to the redhead Potter after taking a deep breath to chase those thoughts out of his mind. Then it will be without me, Lady Potter inquired with a fire of determination and firmness in her emerald green eyes. Lily. James called out in disbelief as he looked at his wife with shock. Around him, many except Severus and Albus were looking at the redhead with equal shock as they all thought she would jump at the opportunity to see her eldest son again. No, James. Nothing you will say will change my mind, Lily sternly said to her husband. But don't you want to see Harry again? James asked her back in an attempt to convince her to agree with Albus's plan. I want to see him more than anyone here, but he is better off without me, without us, Lily replied to her husband before adding in a serious tone. And the last thing I want is to create a war with Japan. We already have our hands full with Voldemort, we cannot afford an international conflict. Some people, once she finished talking, began to murmur with one another. A good portion of them were in agreement with her words while some looked ready to go to Japan regardless of the risks. This portion of people were filled with people who were loyal to Dumbledore. Lily, I beg you to reconcile. Albus began to say with his grandfatherly facade filled with disappointment, but he was rebuffed by the redhead who sharply turned her head to look at him. My decision is standing. With that said, she deliberately left the room without looking back. After a few seconds, some members of the Order including Mundungus also left while shooting unsure looks at Dumbledore, whose face clearly showed his shock and a bit of anger. In the end, not many people remained: Arthur Weasley, Minerva McGonagall, James Potter, Molly Weasley, and 4 others. To Dumbledore's shock, even Severus left the room without even saying anything. Once silence reigned again, Albus started to feel nothing but anger as he was internally furious at Lily for defying him like this. Who does she think she is to oppose him? The great Albus Dumbledore. The old wizard made a note of taking care of the redhead once Harry was back where he should have been in the first place, under this thumb as the perfect malleable weapon he was supposed to be. He was also angry by the amount of people who just left after the redhead, but at least, now he knew who was loyal to him, even if it was people he already knew that they were, such as Molly and James. Albus was internally happy that Arthur and James were still there because they just proved that they were true followers of the light and excellent head of houses. And speaking of Molly Weasley, she couldn't retain herself anymore as she released her familiar and annoying screech-like tone. How dare they leave us? How dare they refuse to do what is right? Arthur wanted to say something to calm his wife but found himself being stopped when he saw the anger in Molly's eyes. James looked equally frustrated by what his wife just did while being also a bit sad. Ever since that night many years ago, their relationship had declined drastically. There was not as much love as when the two married. It worsened after the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries. Lily had always loved Harry and had never forgiven herself for allowing Albus to take him away from them. James, too, had felt guilty but it vanished as quickly as it came. After all, Albus told him he was nothing but a squib. How was he supposed to know that it wasn't true and that Harry was the true savior of the wizarding world? It's not like it was written on the boy's head. But since the truth came out, James tried his best to look for Harry and retake what the BRT in his opinion stole him. Until this morning, Lord Potter wanted to find his eldest to take back what he thought was his and then let the boy live with his family, but when the Daily Prophet was delivered to him, this literally changed his mind. Now he had a new plan: find the BRT, take back what he stole, make him fight Voldemort and later banish him from anything related to the Potters. In James' mind, the shortest and simplest plans were the best. Soon enough, he will again be the talk of the wizarding world as the son of the boy who lived along with being the lords of several prestigious houses. He will of course, allow Lily to take her title of Lady Ravenclaw as it was her right. But the titles of Slytherin and Lefay he would gladly get rid of them. As for him, those houses were dark and shouldn't be associated with a light family such as the Potters. As regrettable as it is to see so many people leaving us, we have to think of what we are going to do next. Albus's words caused James to return back to the real world as around him, the remaining people present were all looking at the old wizard with attention. We must bring Harry back. Lord Potter inquired sternly and firmly to the assembly, who all nodded in agreement. And we will, James? Albus inquired to James with a strange twinkle in his old eyes. Because tomorrow we leave for Japan. Cheers echoed from the small portion of people present as Dumbledore stared at them with satisfaction. Soon the boy who lived will be under his control and the Deathly Hallows will be returned to their true owner. Unknown to him, however, was that Lily had been listening from the other side of the door. When she heard Albus' last words, she knew she had to act quickly. But how? The only way to do it was to find Harry and warn him of what is going on. But she didn't even know where he was. Frustrated, the redhead began to silently walk away to clear her mind, wondering how the hell could she find her eldest son. As if the gods answered her questions, an idea came through her mind and a bright smile appeared on her face. Quickly taking a cloak, Lily then made her way toward the fireplace where she tossed some flue into it while saying softly, "Grimmauld Place." In a burst of green fire she was gone. What she didn't know was that someone was watching her with a grin on her face. It was none other than Destiny, the primordial deity of fate herself and aunt of Harry Peveril Gryffindor Ravenclaw Slytherin Emery's Lefay. She had been there for the whole meeting and had wanted nothing more than to skin Albus and his cronies alive, but it would forbidden for her to act directly or being seen by the mortals. That's why she had been invisible during all this time. "Soon, Lily, you will find your son. Soon you will be much happier," the deity whispered softly as she disappeared in thin air as her job here was done. Elsewhere in England. "Lily? What are you doing here?" Remus snarled in anger as he glared daggers at the redhead who just happened through the fireplace of Grimmauld Place. Tonks was also present but decided to stay away as she prepared their stuffs for their trip to Japan. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Remus." Lily tried to reason the werewolf before another man, Sirius Black himself, stepped closer while glaring at Lady Potter. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't kick you out of here." Sirius growled out to the intruder with nothing but hatred and anger on his face and eyes. "I want to find Harry. He is in danger." Lily replied with maternal concern as she looked at the two men dead in the eyes. Those words caused both Remus and Sirius to froze as they hadn't expected this. None of the two had forgiven Lily for abandoning Harry alongside their former friend, James Prongs and Dumbledore, but they were at least willing to hear her out for now. "How can we believe you?" Remus asked her with a frown as his tone was less dangerous-like. I, Lily Evans Potter, swear upon my life and magic that I am not lying and am looking for Harry to warn him of a great danger to his person. So mote it be. Lily recited the oath as she made some move with her wand. A glowing white light surrounded her body before disappearing almost instantly. Silence followed this for a few moments as Remus, Sirius and Tonks stared at the redhead with shock and surprise. Expecto Patronum. Lily whispered softly, and just as those words were said, a spectral doe shot out of her wand, galloping around for a few moments before disappearing. Believe me now? Lily asked the two men, who absently nodded their heads. All right then, let's sit down and discuss, Sirius inquired hesitantly while shooting a distrustful look at the redhead as he gestured for the couches. All of them sat on the couches, making themselves comfortable. Remus and Tonks glanced at each other worriedly, as it was easy to feel the tension in the air as Sirius was looking at Lily with a serious expression on his face. So what is this danger you are talking about? Lord Black asked the redhead after a few moments of silence. The Order of the Phoenix had a meeting a few moments ago. We were discussing about the Daily Prophet, Lily began to say before Sirius interrupted her with a snort. Ignoring him, Lily went on as she told them about Dumbledore's decision, going into Japan to retrieve Harry despite the threats. Once she finally stopped talking, silence followed as none of them knew what to say next. Yep. Dumbledore became senile. Sirius remarked after a few moments of silence. Does he not care for England at all? His actions will cause nothing but trouble. Remus agreed as he glared at the nearest window as he couldn't believe what the old man was about to do. We must go and warn H-. Tonks began to say, only to be silenced by a hand on her mouth, stopping her to say more. You know where Harry is? Lily asked them with wide eyes of shock as she stared at them. Sending a small glare at a sheepish-looking pink-haired young woman, Sirius looked back at Lily before saying. We won't say anything unless you make an oath of secrecy. The redhead frowned at this but nodded in understanding as she couldn't blame them for being cautious around her. They hadn't talked since Sirius had lashed at James and her for abandoning Harry years ago. I, Lily Evans Potter, swear upon my life and magic that I will not repeat what I will hear here tonight. So mote it be. Once again, a glowing white light surrounded her body before disappearing. Her oath had been accepted. Nodding in satisfaction, Sirius shared a quick glance with both Remus and Tonks before looking back at Lily just as the werewolf stepped forward with a serious expression on his face. Now where should we begin? Malfoy Manor, England, Wizarding World. A maniacal cackle echoed in the air as, deep under Malfoy Manor, the Dark Lord was sitting on his throne-like chair, laughing. A few seconds ago, Severus Snape came and told his Lord of Albus' plan to go to Japan and retrieve the boy who don't care for the Wizarding World. Ever since the Daily Prophet published the letter the missing boy who lived sent for him, the Wizarding World was in an uproar. Many were horrified that their chosen one would abandon them to Lord Voldemort and his Death Eater's allies, while some others were furious about it as they couldn't believe the boy would do such things as leaving them to die. What had horrified them the most was the fact the chosen one would actually encourage the Dark Lord in taking over England, both mundane and magical. Everyone, just by reading the words, could all feel the many feelings the boy who lived, or the boy who don't care as he was now called, had for the Wizarding World. Hatred. Disdain. Disgust. Anger. A lot of the young ones saw their dreams crushed once the news reached their ears. A lot of them had heard that Harry James Potter was the true hero of the Wizarding World instead of Jacob Potter, but then their hero abandoned them all to the darkest wizard England had ever known. Some of the elders even saw this act as cowardice from the supposed boy who lived, and even some of the young adults thought this way as they all thought it was the boy's duty to protect them from dark wizards such as Voldemort and his cronies. The only ones happy with this development were of course the Dark Lord himself, who now know that the prophecy was fake, and his followers, who were now free to do whatever they wanted now that they knew the chosen one wouldn't lift a finger for the wizard kind. Voldemort had ordered his Death Eaters to stop any parties out of the countries as, in his eyes, they didn't have to go look for the young man anymore. Ever since he detected the power in the boy's blood, Snakeface had been wary of fighting him as never before he felt such a power. Heck, even Dumbledore, who is considered as the second coming of the great sorcerer Merlin, don't possess such power. Voldemort wasn't blind like some of his followers were. He could recognize when someone was stronger than him, but in England it was impossible. The people of the wizarding world all believe that there are black and white magic, but it's false. There is no such things as light or dark. Only power. And by what he read in the letter, Harry Peverell seemed to think like him for that point. Another reason to respect the boy in his eyes. Unlike the fools of magical England who all listened to idiots like Dumbledore. Despite being English himself, he had to admit that English wizards and witches were all stupid and ignorant. Ever Frenches and Bulgarians were smarter than a good portion of the wizarding world of Great Britain. Back to present, every Death Eaters gathered around the Dark Lord stayed silent as the snake-faced man kept laughing maniacally. All of them had just heard Severus' report, and some of them were whispering with one another about how idiotic Dumbledore was now. Going to Japan when there are tensions between the Eastern country and England? It was nothing more than a suicide. Does the old coot wants to create an international conflict? The Ministry of Magic and the Aura Department or Aura Office were trying their best to prevent any more problems with Japan that could result in a war. From what Lucius said, even in the Ministry, people were shocked and stunned by Harry's refusal to help them against the Dark Lord and the Death Eaters. As if it wasn't enough, thanks to the letter, attacks on Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade became more and more intense to the point where the minister called off all the English Aurors sent out of the country. Note, those Aurors were sent to look for Harry before the letter came, despite them having checked every country minus Japan for obvious reason. Not that it changed anything in the end. Thanks to Dumbledore's stupid politic of non-lethal curse against Death Eaters, only Stunters and Expelliarmus were used by the Aurors, while their enemies used all curses possible, especially two we all know and love, the Cruciatus Curse and the Killing Curse. Thanks to this, the number of Aurors couldn't stop declining as not many people wanted to join. In fact, a lot of people in the wizarding world, especially in England, were nothing more than cowards who waited for others to do their jobs. That's why they wanted the boy who lived. So he could do his duty and defeat the Dark Lord and the Death Eaters while they stay behind like rats. Like Peter Pettigrew, who died like the rat he was. The traitor died in his animagus form, ironically eaten by a cat belonging to one of the Hogwarts students. The Ministry of Magic became nothing more than a protected fortress used by the Aurors to defend people locked inside, people who were victims of previous attacks. The Death Eaters had tried once to take over the Ministry, but it was a failure as protective wards had been added to prevent them from approaching. The old coot is stupider than I thought. But him out of the countries is a blessing for us. Voldemort inquired with dark joy once he stopped laughing. Why, my lord? One of the Death Eaters, Theodore, not a Hogwarts student who recently joined, asked the snake-faced man with a frown of confusion. Because now the wizarding world is defenseless, the Dark Lord replied to the young man before looking back at his Death Eaters. My loyal followers. Dumbledore is not in England anymore. The light stand now chance against us now. Tomorrow we march on the Ministry of Magic. At those words, every people present, even Nagini, roared their excitement, and some were cheering with madness at the thought of the upcoming bloodshed. Voldemort, stood on his throne, looking at his followers with satisfaction as a dark toothy smirk grew on his noseless face. Soon, magical England would be his, and no one will stop him. Elsewhere. Dear passengers, we are almost reaching our destination. The pilot's voice announced to the seated passengers, who looked relieved for a moment. Among those people, we could see Sirius Orion Black, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora, Don't Call Me That, Tonks and Lily Evans Potter. For hours, the four of them were in that place, as it was the only transport they could use to avoid being caught by either Dumbledore or the remaining people of the Order of the Phoenix. Lily, however, ignored everything and everyone as she looked outside through the porthole. After making her oath of secrecy, Sirius and Remus told her of Harry and how he was doing. It was a shock to hear that her eldest son had multiple girlfriends, but apparently polygamy was common in the supernatural world. She had asked a lot of questions, and some of them were really informative. Example, The fact her son was a freaking werelion creature who dated girls who weren't even humans. Her parents were Christians, so when she heard that her son dated a fallen angel and devils, she almost lost her composure. The redhead was also saddened by how much hatred her eldest had for wizard kind, and she couldn't blame him for that. Despite being reluctant to do it, she gave him up because Albus Bloody Dumbledore said she should. It was the biggest mistake she ever made, and while she knew she couldn't be forgiven, she would at least apologize and be there for her son even if he doesn't want her. She had. Also be shocked when Tonks told her that Harry had a phoenix as familiar, a freaking white royal phoenix at that. The redhead thought at first that he was light, as phoenixes were creatures of the light, but then Remus told her of Harry's reaction to the same question, which had horrified her. Harry was ready to kill if it meant protecting those he loved. From what Sirius said, Harry was neither light or dark but grey. Something that she knew would displease Dumbledore if he heard of this. Sighing, Lily then stared back at the outside, imagining how her eldest looked like now. The other three were silent because both Sirius and Tonks were sleeping, with the latter having her head on Remus' left shoulder. Speaking of the werewolf, he was reading a book to pass the time. But while reading, he couldn't stop glancing at Lily, who was now staring blankly at the outside. Remus felt sympathetic for the redhead, and that's why he had been the first one to forgive her for abandoning Harry. Forgiven but not forgotten. Just when he and Sirius finished telling her about her eldest, Lily helped them in packing their stuffs before literally operating them to the nearest airport. After all, Dumbledore and his clowns would never look at a Muggle airport as for them. No wizards in their right minds would use such transport. "Harry, please don't be too angry with us," the werewolf silently prayed as he imagined the reaction he would get from the young lord. One thing was sure: the reunion will be eventful. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 15. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.